Hello and welcome back. I am Mr. Sesotris. It is Monday, and this week I wanted to go through my favorite reads of 2023. All right, so starting off, and I can't believe that this was just the beginning of last year. It felt like I read this book years ago, and it's been a part of my life forever. But that is Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. I loved this book. It is a mythic retelling of the story of the Ramayana, focusing on the character of Kaikeyi, who was kind of relegated to being sort of an evil stepmother, sort of caricature, and she gets her full story. This book is layered and emotionally investing and gorgeous, and this book is just wonderful, and I loved so much about it. So would definitely recommend this one. Next up, this is a graphic novel. I don't read a ton of graphic novels, but this one was recommended by a number of people on Book Talk, and so I wanted to check it out, and that is Far Sector by NK Jemisin. It's part of the DC universe. It follows kind of a lone Green Lantern character off on her own, but it's very much a standalone story. You don't need to know anything about kind of anything else to get that, but this is just a really wonderful just sci-fi space opera story with some great kind of looks into societal issues and racial issues, and just it's also a ton of fun, and it's funny, and it's just, I really enjoyed this one. Next up is a selection of short stories by Jhumpa Lahiri, and this is called Interpreter of Maladies. This one I picked up at a used book sale at a library years ago. Just because something about it kind of leapt out at me. It might be this big, winner of the Pulitzer Prize sticker here. And I was like, okay, I want to try that out. And it just kind of floated around on my bookshelf forever, but I never donated it. I was like, I do want to read that eventually. I finally did, loved it. Her writing style is just captivating. Her characters are relatable and real, and she talks about sort of the mundane aspects of real life in a way that just feels captivating and relatable. I really enjoyed this one. Next up was kind of a rough read, but a really good one. And I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I'd read her book Beloved and Sula before, and this is kind of the third one of hers that I'd read. And this book is beautifully written. It's incredible. It's important. It's meaningful, but it ripped my soul in little pieces and left me kind of saddened about the state of the universe, in a good way. This book is really good, but man, is it depressing in parts. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's a good kind of depressing because it's talking about things in a very honest way that people don't usually talk about. And so it's really important that we have writers like Toni Morrison, who's no longer with us, sadly, but she gave us very honest portrayals of the world, and I just adore her for it. Next up was a more lighthearted one, and that was The City We Became by NK Jemisin. This is book one in a duology. Oh, there's a cat here. And this one is just delightful. It's funny, it's emotional, it's really cool. It's kind of, if you took like Scooby-Doo and mixed it with Lovecraft. You've got kind of a collection of diverse characters all coming together to face an unspeakable evil. The second book I also really enjoyed, but I feel like the first one is still my favorite of the two. It just drags you in. It's so much fun. It's bright, and it's funny and fast-paced, and it's a ton of fun. I really like this one. Next up is probably one of my favorite reads of the year overall, and that was Jade Legacy by Fonda. This concludes the Greenbone saga. I've been putting off reading this one forever, and I finally did it, and I'm so glad I did. This is such a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy. It's gripping, it's emotional, the characters have such good arcs. Yes, I know, Circe thinks so too. This just had such a meaningful conclusion to a very complicated trilogy, and it would have been so easy to sort of end the trilogy, kind of fumble it right at the ending, but Fonda knew exactly what she was doing, and she gave us an absolutely wonderful conclusion. I love this book. Next up is another one that was a little bit of a downer, but in a good way, and that was Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. This one, again, it's very sad, but it's just, I love the way she writes about people. Her characters all feel very alive, and it's just kind of a book about sort of the unfairness of real life, but it doesn't do it in a way that's like self-indulgent, or, you know, like the book equivalent of like Oscar bait kind of thing. It doesn't feel like it's sort of beating a dead horse just for emotional impact. It genuinely feels deep and meaningful, and the character arcs are very satisfying, and it will make you cry, but in a good way, I promise. The next book on this list of favorites is a book of poetry, and it was called If They Come For Us by Fatimah Asghar, and I really, really love this one. This is nonfiction poetry. It blends sort of elements of the poet's life as well as historical elements, going back to sort of the partition in India in the 1940s, and blending sort of that with sort of the modern day milieu of kind of what it's like to be like an Indian American, kind of navigating life and relationships and family and everything. And it was just really, really gripping. This one leapt off of a bookshelf and attacked me. I wasn't even looking for it. I was just drifting along, looking for something else. And this book was just sort of sitting on the shelf facing out. And there was something about it that just compelled me to grab it. And I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I read it. I really, really loved this one. Next up was another one of my all-time favorite reads of the year, and that was Circe by Madeline Miller. I've been putting this one off a bit. I had read The Song of Achilles, and I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as kind of the hype surrounding it made me think I would like it. And so I put off reading this one because I was like, well, I don't want to be disappointed, but I got this at the same time as I got Song of Achilles, and it was on my shelf, and my cat is named Circe, so I was like, well, it feels important that I read this. And I just really, really loved this. This was definitely my favorite of the two. I'm looking forward to more works that this author puts out. This was gripping. It was just oddly relatable. It's dealing with gods and monsters, and for some reason she gets at sort of a fundamental thing that just captivates you about like what it is to be human, and I just really, really loved this one. Would definitely recommend it. Next on my list of favorites is The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. This one is a lot like 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It's a lot like that, but she definitely finds her own voice. It doesn't feel like a copy or anything like that. This is very much a unique look at sort of a family through the ages. It's got elements of magical realism, and there's a lot of political elements that sort of really give it a realistic feeling, even though there's kind of fantastical elements. It really feels grounded in sort of like the real life frustration of the people living in this time, dealing with a government that they weren't really sure they could trust, and with everything kind of changing so much, and just kind of this feeling of helplessness that the kind of everyday people felt. And all wrapped up in this great family saga. So I really enjoyed this one. Would definitely recommend it. I do want to read more of her works. I have 2 of her books on the shelf, and I really, really want to read those this year. Next up on the list is Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. This is the first book of hers that I've read. It's kind of a collection of short stories, but they are all connected. It's sort of like it tells a long family saga, but it tells it out of order. Each story takes place in a different time period, and so you see some stories where the characters are young, some where they're older, and at the end of it you get this kind of tapestry of this whole family and their struggles and their experiences and their joys and their successes, and it was just one of the most unique novels. I think it is still considered a novel. It does say a novel. But it just, the way it was told was so unique and so captivating, and she has such a good way of blending like dark humor with tragedy and emotional turmoil, and going from kind of the laugh out loud hilarious moments to sort of the darker, more serious, dramatic moments was so perfectly done, and I think that's what made this work so well. Definitely want to read more of her work. Another one on this list, I finished reading the Wheel of Time series last year, and I have to say the final book in the series, A Memory of Light, did not disappoint. I really, really enjoyed it. I've done a full video on my thoughts of the Wheel of Time overall, but in terms of like a satisfying conclusion, I really, really think this was well done. The fact that Brandon Sanderson got handed the reins to the series kind of at the last minute and had to take Jordan's notes after he passed and turn it into the final 3 books in the series, he did a really good job. There's a couple characters that I think Jordan wrote a little bit better, but overall this was a great conclusion. I think it's handled really, really well, and I will just say the chapter, if anyone who's read this knows, the chapter is one of the most sweeping, epic fantasy chapters in the history of fantasy. Even more so than Lord of the Rings. It's really, really fantastic. So I really, really enjoyed my time with this series. Next up on the list, I read this during my spooky season read, and this took up most of the month of September because it's quite a long book, and the book is sort of deceptive in its shortness, but that's The Terror by Dan Simmons. This is historical fiction, survival horror. It's kind of a creature feature as well. And I love Dan Simmons so much. I want to read more of his work. I say that about all of these people, but I want to read more of his work. He wrote the Hyperion Cantos, which is one of the best sci-fi series I've ever read. This was just grueling in the best way. It's like based off of a real life Arctic expedition, and the blending of sort of the survivalist elements of this ship crew, or 2 crews, that are kind of slowly dying as they're struggling to stay alive in the Arctic, while there's some kind of creature following them. It was just really wonderful. The pace is pretty slow, but I think that works because this is very much a slow, agonizing burn. If it was sort of quick, I don't think the terror of being stuck in the Arctic with dwindling supplies would have really impacted the reader that much. So I really, really enjoyed this one. And I will say, even though it looks like it's actually not that big, the text is very small and the margins are small. So this is a lot longer than it seems, but it's worth it. So definitely give it a go. Next up was Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I was going through kind of a Greek mythology retelling phase, and this was probably my favorite of those that I read. It's really interesting in the way that it looks at a character who doesn't have a lot of agency in the original Theseus story. She's just kind of a side character, and in this, the book acknowledges that she doesn't have a lot of agency, but it's sort of about her journey and her inner growth over time as she kind of comes to understand just how much she doesn't matter. I know that sounds bleak, but it's so good and gripping and just beautifully descriptive, and I really, really enjoyed this one. It's a little bleak, but it's definitely worth a read. I loved it. And finally, I ended the year with The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the first book in the Daevabad trilogy. I'm reading the second book, The Kingdom of Copper, right now. As soon as I finished this, I jumped right into the sequel. I adored this book. It wasn't at all what I was expecting, but I'm really glad that I was surprised. When I first started it, I figured it was going to be sort of a political drama, a little bit slower paced, sort of court politics and navigating all of that, which I was excited to read, but what I got was like magic and monsters and action and of course court intrigue as well, but all of the characters are just gripping. This is the best cast of like morally gray characters I've ever come across. Everyone kind of has reasons for doing what they're doing, and there's no real villains. They're sort of villainous characters, but you can kind of understand why they do what they do, even if you don't agree with their decisions. It was just, I love this cast of characters so much, and I cannot wait to finish the second book, and I'm going to jump right into the third book as soon as I'm done. The second book is just as good. So I really, really enjoyed this, and it was a great way to end the year. So those were my favorites of the year. I read 86 books in a year, and I know that's not a lot compared to other book people, but that's fine. There was a lot of books that I read that I did not enjoy. I completed my full run through of all of Anne Rice's vampire series, and that was a very mixed bag. There were some books in that I just did not get into. I was reading the Wheel of Time series, and overall I enjoyed my experience, but there were some books that were a bit of a slog. But ultimately the series was very satisfying. But there was a lot of, I took some breaks and read some like fluffy romance. I read some sort of action, military drama type books that I like to unwind with, Tom Clancy and all that type. But overall, it was a really good reading year. I made an effort beginning of last year to read more diversely. And that gave me like 9 of my 16 favorite books of the year. So I'm really, really glad I did that. There's kind of this misconception that if you sort of actively read more diversely, then, you're giving up on books that you would enjoy in favor of books that you feel like you have to read. It's more like homework. And I'm just here to tell you that's not how it is. The books that I kind of pushed myself outside of my comfort zone to read led me to other authors who I really loved, and it just gave me a really, really good reading year with a ton of books that I really, really, really loved that have become some of my favorite books ever. So that was definitely a great choice, and I'm going to definitely keep that up. I think looking forward to the next year, I'm going to try not to do so many like long series, because I think that was kind of, it ate up a lot of time. Not in terms of like I didn't enjoy them, but it was sort of, I was reading series because I felt I kind of had to finish it, and some of them, like the Anne Rice one, were a bit of a slog. So I want to read more like trilogies, more standalones. I want to read just kind of more different kinds of stuff. Last year, the 3 big series that I went through was the Anne Rice vampire series. I read all of the James Bond novels, and I read the Wheel of Time series, and those are all like 14 books plus for each. And so this year I want to read more shorter series and more standalones, and just kind of enjoy the whole process. So overall, I had a great time. I loved this past year, and I'm so excited for more reading this year. So I'm going to ask you, what was the favorite thing that you read this past year? And what was your least favorite thing that you read? Let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much for watching these videos. I really enjoy making them. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And with that said, I will see you next week. Bye.